music as expression of various spheres of life. This is the topic given for me to cover for the evening. I thought it was the first step of my lecture today. Before that, I found a first step for which this became a second step. The first step is to express my gratitude and thanks to those who have made this program possible. I thought that it was Ruth Brunner to whom I had to express my thanks. But it was not the first step. I had to express my thanks to my brother Rudolph. But it is also not the first step, because he was doing something before he started the planetary synthesis. That was his work with the books and the meditation of Alice A. Bailey. So I feel I have to express my gratitude and thanks to Alice A. Bailey. Before that, I have another step, because the master was the first step, for whom Alice A. Bailey was the second step. So I try to express my gratitude to Master Jwalkur. Yet he has his masters. I think it is only a second step for me to express my gratitude to Master Jwalkur, because I have to express my gratitude to Master Moria and Kutuhumi, and they have their first step, that is Lord Maitreya, the Christ of the world, and he has his first step. So every time I try to express my gratitude to the first step, I find myself in the presence of the second step. There is some peculiar formula that expresses itself in the form of the second step whenever we attempt to reach the first step. And let us try to understand the principle that makes this formula, and let us for the moment call this principle by a significant name. The ancients called it by a name. The ancients called it by a name. That is, if we have a second step, it makes us reach the first step, and when we attempt to reach the first step, it makes us reach the first step and it becomes the second step. If we make an attempt to reach the first step, it makes us reach the first step and it becomes the second and the last step. So there is a principle which is working silently in nature, which makes us reach something, and while doing so, it makes us understand something as the first principle and something as the last principle. And after a proper examination of the whole background of ourselves, it makes us understand that the first principle and the last principle are only the first and the last to our mind, and the whole thing is a process of rotation, and we psychologically feel that there is a first principle and there is a second principle, because our mind can exist only in terms of the first and the second principle. When we have the capability of going beyond mind and try to feel what is there beyond mind and try to understand the principle that is working beyond mind, we very much understand every existence has its first and second principles, understood as the first and the last principle, and the whole thing working on the background, and this background is named eternity. Of course, the word has no much meaning, but the human being tried to use some word, he used eternity. And on the background of eternity, we find every time an activity which has a beginning and an ending, and a mind is produced to every one of us and given to us, and in terms of the mind we understand everything as the first step and the last step. But if we go to the background, which is already there, we understand that there is only a cyclic activity going on, and we get the words like periodicity and change. Try to understand what you mean by the word periodicity and what you mean by the word change. Don't try to understand what the words mean. They do not mean anything, because you are the person who use the words. You mean something by using the words. To mean something, you are coining the words and using them. Therefore, always you mean something and the words never mean anything at all. Whenever you want to mean something, you use a word, and then temporarily the word means something to you. Please have a little leisure to think over these few remarks when you go home, because these few remarks which I made till now, they mean everything to you, because they mean everything to me also, because they mean what we call our background. And the ancient seers could understand this principle that is working on the background, the principle that is producing something. And whenever we make an attempt to understand that something, the principle produces a previous step and make us try to understand the first step. The moment we try to understand the first step, it ceases to be the first step, because it has its previous step. Thus, the principle is producing a cyclic activity, and if you call the principle by the name principle, there is no use. You should make a closer approach to the principle. What is it that is presenting itself as the first cause to anything to your mind? This is the first thing we have to do. That is what Rudolph proposed. But I found something else as the first thing to do. So this became the second thing to do. There is a principle that is working in you. For example, if I feel it is the first thing for me to speak, if I try to express, it is my first duty to speak something to you, then immediately I feel that there is another duty before that. I have my first duty to breathe out before I speak. Before I breathe out, I have my first duty to breathe in. It's not the detail which I am describing that I am pointing out to, but I point out to a principle that is working out this detail. It would not have become possible for me to express it had it been any other translator except Alisa, because we are related to the work for more than 2 years. She is acquainted with my thoughts and I am acquainted to her translation. So we are able to express these things through two voices. And what should this principle be called? The principle was called by the ancients by the name music. We should first understand that we use the word too loose and too flippantly. We say there is a musical performance. Many times we use the word musical performance. Music is not a performance, but it is something which makes you to give a performance. Sometimes we say they make music. In many countries we use many phrases for music. In India they use the word, the phrase, they play the music. Music is not something to be played, but music makes you play something, either an instrument or a voice. And in some parts of India they use the phrase, they are singing music. It's not so very correct. People sing a song but not music. Music makes them sing. Always it is the cause and not the result. Therefore, it is the first cause which leads us to the previous cause. We should try to understand the first thing and we will approach the real meaning of music whenever we try to understand the first thing that governs as a principle. If some people sing a song, they say, I am listening to music. In fact, we are listening to sounds and not music. But music is something which makes us listen the sound. It is clear at every step that there is a background principle which should be called music, but at every step we are calling the second principle by the name music. I will give you another example which is commonly not called music. If I draw a figure like this and I draw another figure like this and ask you which is good, the illiterate expresses that this is good and that is not good. About 98% of the human beings express that this is a better figure than the other one. Only about 1 or 2% are in doubt still which is better, and to that 1 or 2% belong some artists of the modern school of art who try to seek regularity in irregularity, and who try to seek something beautiful in something which is not beautiful. You can ask me, what is beauty? So we have to go to the background principle, which we call music. Only when applied to sound we are calling it music. If you apply it to form or shape, even then the background principle is the same. And if you apply it to color, if an artist produces a good color combination, you say it is good. And if there is a dirty conglomeration of all colors on paper, you say that it's not good, even though it is made up of colors. The sense that makes you understand what is good and what is not good is the same thing which you call music. The background cause is the same. When it is expressed through sound, you are calling it music, and when it is expressed through color, you are calling it something else. When it is expressed through form, you are calling it something else. But on the background, only one principle is working, and that principle was called music by the ancients, because they say that there is a music of the spheres. What do they mean by the phrase music of the spheres? If music exists only with sound, you cannot have music of the spheres. If you make a careful examination of the structure of the solar system and find out the principle that exists in the background, which makes the interplanetary distances exactly the same as they are, and the relationship between the mass of a planet and the distance between two planets, the weight of two planets and the distance between two planets, the volume of two planets and the distance between the two planets, and the relationship of each planet with the center, which we call the sun, and the cause that keeps the solar system intact. It exists as the background, and it is the same. Suppose one planet is a little bit more heavy than what it should be, then what would have happened? There would not have been this solar system at all, because the whole system would have been smashed into pieces. But something exists that keeps the planets in their places, weights, volumes, positions and form. We try to express it in words, and we produced a word called equilibrium. We produced a word called poise. All these words are useless attempts to produce a word to represent a principle, but yet we are obliged to use some such words and phrases, because we feel the existence of a principle on the background. We want to feel it in more definite terms. We cannot feel in more definite terms because we are only a part of it. And since a part cannot feel the whole, just as a drop of water cannot contain the whole water in the, we have a feeling of the background principle, an understanding of the background principle, but yet there is something more to understand. And the word music represents the background principle of all these levels. That's why they used the phrase the music of the spheres. And if after 200 years or 300 years from now, the human being understands the significance of the atom and its structure and tries to find out the principle that binds an atom, then he finds the same thing. It's not yet time for the human being to understand the cause of the structure of the atom, because still the human mind is working in effects and not the causes, because mankind still lives in ugly things like war. We have not crossed the beastly instinct of necessity to enter into the core of our real consciousness, which will be called after 200 or 300 years by the same word music. But the human being will have a stature to use the word only when he stops war. Then we have differences between nations and nations, and races and races, countries and countries, and families and families, husband and wife, father and son, and a brother and brother. Still we are in such a beastly state of existence. We know music only in a particular sense. I do hope that after 2 or 3 centuries there comes a human race that has the stature to use the word music in its true sense. But before that, we should cross the necessity of war and difference. We should be able to find out what is common among us all. We should cross the beastly instinct of finding that which is different from others in us. As long as we are trying to understand in what way we are different from others, we have no stature to understand the words like music. We believe in having something distinguished from others. Generally, we believe in the principle to live in a way different from others. This proves the existence of animal instinct in us. And we find people who want to understand that which is common in all. There are 2 groups of people among the human beings on this earth. Those who want for themselves, those who want to know what they want for themselves, those who want to know what the humanity wants. The second group of people are whom we call masters, because they see humanity whenever they use man, whereas the other group of human beings, they see himself when they use the word man, himself or herself. A husband sees himself away from his wife, his sweet wife. However she loves her husband, she remembers what she wants different from what the husband wants. No doubt the husband and wife use shamelessly the same word love, but the husband remembers what he wants different from the wife, and the wife remembers what she wants different from the husband. It is what is called individuality, which makes man a beast. Man develops like the chick in an egg in a layer called individuality. which marks the beastly instinct of the human being. We have to pass through many thousands of reincarnations before the semi-fluid form of the inner content takes a shape of a little bird. Then the bird tries to make an opening from within, and the shell begins to give way, and then individuality breaks. And we have a second layer also in the egg, which we call personality, in which we will be forced to live through thousands of reincarnations once again before we begin to exist. Previously, the egg was existing and the chick was not existing. So, our individuality is existing, we are not existing now. And after some time, the personality exists and we do not exist for some time. Then there comes a day in the course of our individual evolution and personal evolution, we begin to exist. Then the shell is totally broken and the chick begins to exist for the first time, having an idea of a bigger egg made up of its own earth and its own heaven, that is its own space around itself, which it believes its own world. It thinks, it believes that it is the total space. There are many of us who believe that the space we see is the total space, but we are poor little chicks, because the space we see around us is the egg of space to which we belong. Like that, there are as many eggs of space as there are eggs in the market. So, we have two stages yet to pass through, and the third stage is what the masters call the soul consciousness. So, we are not the egg, we are the chicken. We are not the outer shell, but we have the outer shell. We are not the inner shell, but we have the inner shell. We are ourselves. So, we have an individuality, we have a personality, but we are the soul. But there are people who believe that they have a soul. Of course, it may be correct in some other sense. If you use the word soul, it exists under the shoe, whereas this soul exists as yourself, not to have it, but to be like that. So, if you want to speak about this soul, you should say, I am this soul. If you say, I have a soul, it is not here, but it is only under your boot you are having it. You have a mind, you have everything, but you are a soul. And if we want to understand what this soul is, you should experience yourself, and then you will be able to know the real meaning of the word music. I draw a figure and ask you what it is. Very easy to answer. It is a triangle. But is the granule, is the powder of chalk a triangle? What is it that we are referring to when we say a triangle? Is it to the bird Not at all. To the